The Korangal Valley had a way of swallowing sound. Gunfire echoed off the sheer rock walls, bouncing from ridge to ridge until no one could tell where it truly came from. The locals called it the Valley of Death. The Marines had another name for it, Hell's Canyon. At 0600 hours, Lieutenant Mark Dillard led his platoon down the rocky trail, boots grinding against shale. The air was thin, dry, and smelled faintly of cordite, a warning carried by the wind. They had been sent to retrieve an Afghan interpreter who had gone missing 2 days before. Routine, command said, in and out before breakfast. They hadn't had breakfast in 2 days. The sun burned high above, a cruel spotlight on 30 men who hadn't slept. Their radios hissed with static. Communication towers couldn't reach beyond the canyon's granite walls. They were ghosts in an unmarked grave waiting to happen. A first shot came from nowhere, a single crack that split the silence. Lance Corporal Jensen dropped instantly, his body twisting mid-step before slamming into the dirt. Dillard dove behind a boulder, scanning the ridgeline. Contact, right? 50 meters high. He yelled. Within seconds, the canyon exploded in chaos. Machine gun fire rained down from both sides. Tracer rounds carved streaks of red through the dust. The Marines scrambled for cover among jagged rocks and dry stream beds. One Humvee took a direct hit from an RPG, bursting into flame, the shockwave throwing men to the ground. "God damn it, they've got us triangulated," Sergeant Ruiz shouted, gripping his rifle as bullets sparked against stone. "We're boxed in." Dillard's mind raced. The map was useless. This wasn't the route they'd planned. Somehow, the enemy knew exactly where they'd be. Ambush. Someone had tipped them off. He grabbed the radio handset, shouting into the static. "Viper 1, this is Hammer 2-6. We're pinned down in grid. Only static." Then a voice, distant, broken. "Hammer 2-6. Repeat location signal weak." "Can't hold much longer," Dillard shouted. But the transmission cut off before he finished. The enemy fire intensified. Mortar began dropping with brutal precision, shattering rock and earth. Shrapnel tore through the air like angry bees. One shell landed too close, a deafening blast that sent Dillard sprawling. His ears rang. When he blinked his eyes open, he saw Corporal Ramirez clutching his leg, blood soaking through his fatigues. "Tourniquet," Dillard barked. Private Collins crawled over, trembling as he wrapped a belt around Ramirez's thigh. The wounded Marine gritted his teeth, face pale but alive. They had 6 wounded now, no air support, no medevac, and ammo running dry. Every few minutes, Dillard peeked over the rock. The enemy was dug into the cliffs, unseen, patient, methodical. He counted at least 3 PKM nests, maybe more. It was a shooting gallery, and they were the targets. "Sir," Ruiz said, crouching beside him, "we can't stay here. If they flank us, they already are," Dillard cut in. "We move, they mow us down. We stay, we bleed out." He checked his watch. They'd been in the fight for almost 4 hours. Backup should have arrived by now. But the skies were empty. No drones, no jets. Just the constant scream of bullets and the hollow thump of mortar echoing through the canyon walls. Private Daniels looked up from his rifle, eyes wide. "Sir, what if they can't reach us?" Dillard met his gaze. "Then we make damn sure they know where we fell." Another explosion shook the ground. The smell of burning diesel filled the air. The second Humvee caught fire, sending black smoke spiraling upward, a signal flare they hadn't intended to make. Somewhere in that smoke, the hope of rescue felt smaller and smaller. "Man down!" Ruiz shouted again. A sniper's bullet had caught Corporal Singh in the neck. Blood sprayed across the rock face. The medic scrambled to patch him, but the wound was too deep. Within moments, Singh was gone. Dillard looked away, forcing the grief down. There would be time later, if there was a later. Minutes blurred into hours. The canyon heat turned cruel, shimmering like a furnace. Every breath was dust. Every move risked death. The Marines had stopped speaking except in short bursts of radio code. The once confident platoon had become silent silhouettes crouched in shadows, running on adrenaline and prayer. At 1100, a new sound cut through the chaos. Not gunfire, but laughter. Insurgents, unseen but close, were mocking them over captured radio frequencies. "Americans trapped," a voice said in broken English. "We see you. We finish you soon." Ruiz spat into the dirt. "Come finish it then, coward." Dillard looked to the sky again. Empty. Just endless blue framed by jagged cliffs. He whispered under his breath, "Where the hell are our birds?" He tried the radio one last time. "Any aircraft, this is Hammer 26. We are surrounded in Korangal Valley. Multiple. Wounded, running low on ammo. We need air support immediately." He waited. Static. Then a faint female voice, calm, steady, breaking through interference. "Copy that, Hammer 26. Sit tight. Angel 1 inbound." The Marines froze. Dillard looked around, stunned. Did anyone else hear that? Collins nodded slowly. "Sir, who's Angel 1? But before Dillard could answer, another mortar slammed nearby, forcing them back into cover. He assumed it was a fluke. Maybe just another pilot relaying false hope. He'd heard of calcines like Viper or Reaper, but Angel 1? Never. Still, something about that voice. Calm under fire, steady as stone. It didn't sound like command chatter. It sounded personal. By noon, their ammunition was nearly gone. Dillard's M4 was down to 2 magazines. The medics were out of morphine. Ramirez was drifting in and out of consciousness. The sun had turned the rocks into ovens. Sweat mixed with blood, coating their hands like tar. The enemy fire never stopped. It just changed rhythm. Bursts, pauses, then bursts again, like a heartbeat made of war. Finally, Dillard gave the order no leader ever wanted to give. "Prepare to fall back." Ruiz's eyes went wide. "Sir, there's nowhere to go." "I know," Dillard said quietly. "But we're not dying in this hole." The men moved. In pairs, dragging the wounded toward the dry stream that curved toward the canyon mouth. As they crawled through the dust, rounds kicked up earth inches from their faces. Every step forward felt like one closer to death. Then, faintly at first, came a new sound. A deep, growling hum that built into a roar. It was different from the helicopters or fast jets they knew. This was heavier, lower, like thunder rolling in steel. The Marines froze, looking up. A glint of sunlight flashed across the canyon rim. Then they saw it, twin engines, straight wings, shark-like nose, an A-10 Thunderbolt too, slicing through the smoke. "She came," Collins whispered. Dillard stared, disbelief written across his face. No way they sent a warthog into this canyon. But it was there, unmistakable, flying lower than any pilot dared. And though the roar of gunfire still surrounded them for the first time that day, the Marines didn't hear death. They heard deliverance. "Angel 1, Dillard muttered almost reverently. "Whoever you are, don't miss." The A-10 banked sharply, sunlight flashing off its titanium armor. The sound of its engines filled the canyon, and then the distinct, terrifying growl of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun up. The Marines ducked instinctively as the mountain itself seemed to tremble. Fire and thunder rained from the sky. And for the first time in 12 hours, the Marines believed they might live. At Bagram Air Base, the air smelled of oil, jet fuel, and waiting. Captain Sarah Whitmore sat in the dim glow of the operations room, helmet resting beside her, eyes fixed on the green radar screen. It flickered in rhythmic pulses. Outside, thunder rolled across the Afghan sky. Rain struck the tarmac in sharp metallic pings, tapping on the canopies of parked aircraft like impatient fingers. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, her Warthog, waited under the storm like a caged beast, gray and ugly but loyal. Every pilot at Bagram called her crazy for loving that plane. The Warthog wasn't fast, wasn't pretty, but it could fly home with half a wing and still deliver hell to the enemy. Sarah loved that. She loved it because she was like it, built to take hits and keep going. She was reviewing maintenance logs when the radio operator's voice cracked through the static. Mayday call from Hammer 26. Marines under fire in Korangal Valley. Coordinates transmitting now. The room froze. Officers leaned in, eyes narrowing. Everyone knew that valley, the Korangal, or as soldiers called it, the Canyon of Death. A young lieutenant muttered, "No one flies into that hole. Not even drones." Sarah straightened. "Are they cut off?" "Affirmative," said the operator. "They've been pinned since dawn. No air cover, no evac route. Terrain's too steep for choppers." She turned toward the operations commander, Colonel Mason, a tall man with steel-gray hair and years of combat in his eyes. "Sir, let me take a run. The Warthog can handle those ridges." He didn't even look at her. Denied. Her jaw tightened. "Sir, they won't make it without cover fire. The weather's closing in. No GPS, no visual. We'd lose the aircraft and the pilot. We're not risking a multi-million-dollar machine for a lost squad." Sarah's voice went cold. "They're not lost, sir. They're waiting for someone to remember them." Mason met her stare. "You're grounded, Captain." "That's an order." She nodded once, too quickly, and walked out before her temper could speak louder than she did. Outside, the storm hit her face like needles. She stopped under the wing of her A-10, rain sliding down its armor. She ran her hand across the nose cone, fingers tracing the worn paint of her call sign. Angel 1. She remembered the last time she'd heard that name. Her brother, Private Jacob Whitmore, had given it to her before his last deployment. He'd been a Marine, proud, reckless, and full of laughter. He died 3 years ago, ambushed in the same valley. They never recovered his body. Sarah looked toward the distant mountains, black silhouettes against lightning flashes. "Not again," she whispered. Inside the hangar, her crew chief, Sergeant Willis, watched her. "You're not seriously thinking of—" "I'm going," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You don't even have clearance." She looked up at the A-10's cockpit, water streaming off the canopy. "Then I guess I'll just have to take it." Willis sighed. "You always did have a death wish, Captain." "No," she said, climbing the ladder. "I just hate unfinished promises." By the time she powered up the engines, the base alarms were blaring. Mechanics and ground crews stared as the A-10 roared to life. The twin turbines screamed, shaking the hangar walls. She adjusted her oxygen mask, her pulse steady. "Angel 1, this is Control. You do not have clearance for takeoff," the tower barked. Sarah switched to a secure frequency. "Control, this is Angel 1. You'll have to catch me first." Before anyone could respond, she throttled forward. The A-10 shot down the rain-soaked runway, spray kicking up behind her. Lightning illuminated the wings as she lifted off into the storm, the engines howling against the wind. Inside the cockpit, everything was vibration and noise. Rain hammering, alarms warning of turbulence, radar blinking out. But her hands were steady. Flying was the only place she felt calm. The chaos outside couldn't reach her here. At 5,000 feet, she broke through the lower cloud layer. Visibility dropped to nothing but gray and flashes of light. Her voice was steady as she radioed back to the base. Angel 1 airborne, vectoring toward Korangal coordinates. ETA 12 minutes. No reply. The storm jammed the frequency. She exhaled slowly, scanning the jagged terrain below on her HUD. The valley loomed ahead, narrow, twisting, impossible. Her co-pilot and weapons officer, Lieutenant Evan Ross, adjusted his headset. "Sarah, this is suicide. GPS is dead, terrain's blind, and that canyon eats planes for breakfast. Then we'll make it dinner," she said, pulling the throttle slightly forward. Ross laughed nervously. "Remind me again why I agreed to fly with you?" "Because," she said, smiling faintly, "you're the only one dumb enough to keep up." The smile faded as static crackled through their comms again. A faint, broken voice, heavy with fear and exhaustion. ... Hammer 2-6. Taking heavy fire. Multiple wounded. Anyone out there? Sarah leaned closer to the mic. "Hammer 2-6, this is Angel 1. Hold tight, I've got your signal." Silence. Then another voice, raw and desperate. "Who the hell is Angel 1? Sarah's tone didn't waver. "The one who's not leaving you behind." Ross turned to her, eyes wide. "You realize you just promised 30 men their lives?" "I've made harder promises," she said. As they approached the canyon, the turbulence worsened. The A-10 rocked violently, metal creaking under the strain. She guided it through sheets of rain, reading the terrain by instinct. Below, flashes of orange and red-marked explosions. She could see muzzle fire, tiny sparks on the ridges. The Marines were pinned in a bowl of death, the enemy perfectly positioned above them. Ross cursed. "There's no room to turn. You fly in there, we don't fly out." Sarah adjusted her visor. "Then we don't miss." She flicked the weapon systems online. The heads-up display lit up with targets. She locked onto the ridge. Ross swallowed hard. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" "Evan," she said softly, "if I die, tell Mason he was wrong." Then she pushed the stick forward. The A-10 tilted nose down, engine screaming as they plunged toward the canyon. Lightning flashed across the walls as they dropped altitude. The narrow space closed in like jaws. Rock faces streaked past barely 50 feet from the wingtips. Below, tracer rounds reached up toward them like claws. Ross shouted, "Incoming RPG, left side." Sarah banked right hard, the missile streaking past, exploding against the wall. Shrapnel pinged off the fuselage. The cockpit shook violently, warning alarms flaring red. Still, she didn't pull up. Her heart was calm, her breathing measured. This was where she belonged, between chaos and salvation. The GAU-8 cannon beneath the nose spun up with its distinct mechanical growl, the sound of vengeance. "Guns hot," she said. "Let's make some noise." Far below, the trapped Marines looked up from their cover. The sound reached them first, a deep, rolling thunder, unlike any they'd heard before. Then came the sight, a gray streak slicing through smoke, wings wide, fire spitting from the nose. Sergeant Ruiz shouted, "That's a warthog." "Holy, she's flying in the canyon." The A-10 passed overhead, unleashing a storm of rounds that ripped through enemy positions. Rocks exploded. The mountains themselves seemed to roar back. Dillard's radio crackled again. "Hammer 2-6, Angel 1 on station. Let's clean up your yard." He stared at the sky, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Angel 1, we thought you weren't coming." Sarah's voice was calm as ever. "I go where my brothers bleed." Inside the cockpit, Ross wiped sweat from his brow. "Targets neutralized. But we're taking damage." "Good," she said. "Means we're hitting back." Outside, smoke rose from the cliffs. Enemy fire slowed. replaced by confusion and retreat. The Marines rallied, shouting in disbelief, morale reignited. Sarah leveled the jet, preparing for another run. "They're not safe yet." Ross groaned. "You're insane." She grinned. "Then let's be legendary." And with that, she banked again, deeper into the canyon that no pilot dared enter, the storm swallowing her whole. The canyon narrowed around her like a steel coffin. On either side, jagged cliffs reached up into clouds, their faces scarred by centuries of wind and war. Lightning illuminated the walls for split seconds, ghostly flashes that made the rocks look alive. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sarah Whitmore gripped the stick so tightly her knuckles turned white. The A-10's control column vibrated in her hand, the aircraft shuddering from the strain. Turbulence rolled through the fuselage like a living thing, clawing at every bolt and panel. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Evan Ross, was shouting over the noise. "We're flying below safe altitude. We lose an engine here. We're done." Sarah didn't respond. Her eyes flicked across the instrument cluster, altimeter, airspeed, terrain proximity warnings all screaming in angry red. The computer wanted her to climb. The canyon wouldn't let her. She pushed lower. Outside, rain turned into sheets of steel. The wipers beat frantically against the canopy, barely clearing the view ahead. The heads-up display flickered, struggling to stabilize. Her headset crackled. A familiar voice broke through, weak but alive. "Angel 1, this is Hammer 2-6. We're still pinned down taking fire from both ridges. Any chance you can see us?" She steadied her breathing. "Copy, Hammer 2-6. I see you. Stay low and mark your position with red smoke. I'll take care of the rest." There was silence for a heartbeat. Then Dillard's voice came back, rough and unbelieving. "You've got to be kidding. You're actually in the canyon?" Sarah smiled faintly. "That's affirmative. Sit tight, Lieutenant. It's about to rain fire." From above, her A-10 looked like a hawk diving into a pit of serpents. She banked left, lining up for her next run. The targeting computer flickered, briefly locking. Onto movement near the ridges, thermal signatures glowing like embers in the dark. "Targets confirmed," Ross called. 3 machine gun nests on the north ridge. Mortar position on the east slope. About 20 hostiles total. "Copy that," she said. "We start with the mortar. Those are bleeding them dry." Sarah pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with a thunder that swallowed the storm itself. 3,900 rounds per minute of armor-piercing fire, tearing through the rain. The recoil jolted the plane upward slightly, a vibration rattling her bones. Below, the Marines saw heaven open. The cannon's roar echoed down the canyon like the voice of God. The mortar vanished under a chain of explosions, debris tumbling down the slopes. Lieutenant Dillard ducked behind a rock as chunks of earth showered him. He looked up, half laughing, half crying. "She's insane, and she's saving our asses." "Angel 1, direct hit," Ross confirmed. "Mortar neutralized." Sarah leveled out, heart pounding. "Then let's give them something to remember." The insurgents weren't idle. The moment the A-10 pulled out of the dive, tracer rounds streaked upward from the cliffs. RPGs hissed through the air, exploding close enough to rock the jet. Missile, 3 o'clock high," Ross shouted. Sarah slammed the throttle forward, banked hard right, and released flares. The jet howled as it rolled through smoke and lightning. The missile curved behind them, then detonated harmlessly in the clouds. Inside the cockpit, red warning lights flashed. Hydraulic pressure dropped. "Right wings hit," Ross warned. "We've got fluid leaking." Sarah's breathing stayed calm. "We'll patch it with luck." "Luck?" Ross snapped. "That's your plan?" "Luck and stubbornness," she said, her eyes narrowing. "It's worked before." They circled wide, using the mountain's shadow for cover. Below, the Marines were regrouping, dragging the wounded into tighter formation. The smoke from their red signal flares glowed faintly through the rain, a target and a prayer all in one. Sarah's voice came through their radios again. Hammer 2-6, confirm visual on red smoke. I'm lining up a second run. Dillard responded, breathing hard. Confirmed. East Ridge still hot. They've got a heavy gun pinning our right flank. Understood, Sarah said. Get your men ready to move when I hit that ridge. You'll have 30 seconds of silence. Make them count. Roger that. Godspeed, Angel One. Sarah tightened her harness. Here we go. She dove again, this time faster, lower. The A-10 sliced through rain and smoke like a blade. She aimed for the ridge where muzzle flashes blinked like fireflies in the night. Guns hot, Ross shouted. The Avenger cannon spat fire once more, cutting a burning path through the cliffside. Rocks erupted. Enemy fighters scattered. The canyon filled with thunder, dust, and flame. But the price came fast. A sharp bang, then a violent jolt. The right engine took a hit. Warning alarms screamed. The cockpit lights turned crimson. Engine 2's gone, Ross yelled. Sarah gritted her teeth. We can fly on one. Not down here, we can't. We'll find out. The A-10 groaned as she pulled up sharply, the frame rattling. She cleared the ridge by inches, skimming through smoke. Below, the Marines charged, using her cover fire to push forward. Dillard's voice crackled through again, panting and hoarse. Angel One, you just cleared us a path. We're moving toward the canyon mouth. Sarah smiled, sweat dripping down her temple. Copy that, Hammer 2-6. Keep moving. I'll keep them off your tail. They swung around for another pass, but the damage was worsening. Hydraulic systems were bleeding pressure. Controls stiffened. Ross's voice softened. Sarah, if we keep this up, we're not coming out. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the canyon, the same cursed valley that had taken her brother. Somewhere below, maybe in this very dirt, he'd fallen. I didn't come here to leave halfway, she said finally. Ross sighed. You sound just like him. Sarah glanced at him. Like who? Your brother, he said quietly. He talked about you. Said you were the one person crazy enough to fly through a storm for him. For a moment, she froze. Just a second of silence before she spoke again. And I guess I'm right on schedule. Outside, the rain began to ease. The storm's fury softened into mist, revealing the devastation below. Smoke rose from shattered ridges, bodies strewn across the cliffs. The Marines were moving, limping, carrying the wounded, heading toward open ground. But the insurgents were regrouping again. Through the haze, fresh muzzle flashes blinked on the far slope. They're coming back, Ross said. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then so are we. The A-10 dipped its nose once more. This time, she flew even lower, so low the wingtips brushed the canyon walls. Rocks scraped paint from the fuselage. Sparks flashed against metal. She felt the earth pull at her, gravity whispering to let go. Altitude, pull up. The onboard system repeated. Not yet, she muttered. Ross gripped his seatbelt. Sarah, not yet. At the last second, she pulled the trigger. The cannon thundered, the recoil shoving the jet upward. A line of explosions erupted along the ridge, erasing the last of the ambushers. Fire and smoke filled the air. Sarah pulled hard on the stick, the A-10 climbing, engines straining. Come on, girl, she whispered to the jet. Stay with me. For a moment, the world blurred, sky and mountain, light and shadow, merging into one. Then they broke through the smoke, rising above the canyon. Ross let out a shaky breath. We're alive. Sarah's eyes glistened behind her visor. So are they. Below, Lieutenant Dillard looked up through the haze. He could barely make out the A-10 disappearing into the clouds. one engine smoking, its roar fading into distance. One of his Marines said softly, "Sir, she's not human." Dillard smiled faintly. "No, she's what humans should be." He keyed his radio. "Angel 1, Hammer 2-6. You've given us a way out. We owe you our lives." There was a pause, then Sarah's voice, faint but steady. "Just make it count, Lieutenant." Then the signal cut. Inside the cockpit, warning lights still flashed, systems failing, fuel low. But Sarah didn't turn back yet. She hovered above the storm clouds, looking down at the valley that had nearly taken her and her brother both. "I made it through," she whispered. "So did they?" Ross leaned back, exhaling. "You're insane, Whitmore." "Maybe," she said with a tired smile, "but insanity saves lives sometimes." And as the clouds swallowed the A-10 once more, the Marines below began their march out of the canyon, alive, because one pilot refused to let the storm decide who lived and who didn't. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was worse than the thunder. Captain Sarah Whitmore's A-10 hummed like a wounded beast above the canyon. Smoke trailed from her right engine, the instruments flickering. Below, the Marines were still moving, tiny shapes crawling through mud and ruin toward open desert. "Fuel down to 15%, Lieutenant Evan Ross said, scanning the gauges. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before she starts coughing." Sarah didn't reply immediately. Her eyes traced the shape of the canyon below, a scar carved deep into the earth, swallowing sunlight. In the far distance, beyond the smoldering ridges, she could see movement again, armored trucks, enemy reinforcements rolling in fast. "They're not done," she said quietly. "They're sending another wave." Ross leaned forward. "How many?" "Too many for the Marines to handle on foot. Look, convoys, technicals, 2 mortar on the lead truck." Ross's voice was grim. "Command said reinforcements are 20 minutes out. The Marines won't last that long." Sarah exhaled slowly. "Then we don't give the enemy 20 minutes." She banked hard, circling the canyon mouth. The engine coughed, the entire airframe trembling. Ross grabbed the overhead handle. "Sarah, we can't make another dive. That engine's on its last breath." "Then we glide," she said, adjusting trim manually. "One last run. You'll kill us both." Her voice was calm. "Not if we do it right." Below, Lieutenant Dillard and his exhausted squad watched the sky. They'd reached the canyon's edge, but escape wasn't victory. Not when dust clouds in the east signaled incoming enemy vehicles. "Sir," Corporal Reyes said, reloading his rifle, "we've got less than 50 rounds between us." Dillard looked at the horizon. "Then we use our last bullets to make it count." A new sound broke through the air, the slow, unmistakable roar of the A-10's remaining engine. The Marines lifted their heads. "She's coming back," Reyes whispered. Dillard blinked in disbelief. "No, not again. She can't still be flying." But she was. Sarah angled the A-10 low, skimming above the canyon floor. The sky glowed orange from distant fires, smoke curling like ghosts. The radio crackled with static and faint transmissions from the Marines. "Angel 1, we're at the canyon mouth. Enemy vehicles inbound from the east." "Requesting—" "Copy that," Sarah interrupted, her tone clipped but steady. "I see them. Mark your position and hold fire. I'm bringing the storm." Ross shook his head. "We're out of standard ordnance. Only 1 AGM minus 65 left and a few hundred rounds for the cannon." "Then we use everything," Sarah said. "We'll make it count." The enemy convoy entered the canyon, headlights piercing through smoke. The lead truck carried a mounted mortar. The ones behind were loaded with fighters. Their shouts echoed, a mix of triumph and rage. They thought the Americans were finished. Sarah's targeting system flickered to life, barely functioning. She selected manual lock. Ross read the data. Target distance, 3 miles. Range decreasing fast. Perfect, Sarah murmured. Hold on. The A-10 descended again, lower than any sane pilot would dare. She felt every gust, every pocket of turbulence trying to tear the wings apart. The radio altimeter screamed warnings, but she ignored them. Ross braced. You're going to clip the ridge. Then we'll shave it, she said, her jaw clenched. At 500 feet, she leveled out. The canyon walls streaked past in a blur. The targeting reticle flashed green. Locked, Ross said. Fox 1. A missile streaked away, slicing through the smoky sky. A heartbeat later, impact. The lead truck erupted in a fireball, a shockwave rippling down the canyon. The convoy scattered. Fighters dove for cover, some firing blindly at the A-10 as it roared overhead. Sarah gritted her teeth. Let's give them a proper send-off. She squeezed the trigger. The G-8 Avenger barked to life, a sound deeper, angrier than thunder. Tracer rounds tore into the convoy, shredding trucks and men alike. Below, the Marines watched in stunned awe as fire rained down. Sweet Mother of God, Reyes muttered. She's insane. Dillard couldn't tear his eyes away. She's saving every one of us. But the cost was brutal. The A-10 took another hit, this time from a stray RPG that exploded near the left wing. The aircraft lurched violently, alarms shrieking. Ross shouted over the chaos. We've lost hydraulic control on the left aileron. Then we fly crooked, Sarah replied, fighting the stick with both hands. Sweat poured down her face. The plane was dying, but she refused to let go. She looked at the radar. Still more vehicles were inbound. They wouldn't make it in time for another run. Not before the Marines were overrun. Sarah, Ross said softly, seeing the look in her eyes. Don't. But she'd already decided. Switching to manual flight control, she said, flipping the lever. We're going back in. Sarah, we don't have enough altitude to recover from another dive. I know. Ross stared at her. Then why? Because they don't get to die here, she said, voice low but burning. Not while I'm still in the sky. The A-10 turned sharply, dipping one final time toward the canyon floor. Smoke swirled around it like storm clouds reborn. A roar of the remaining engine filled the air. Inside, alarms blared. Systems were collapsing, one by one. Ross muttered under his breath, You're completely out of your mind. Sarah smiled faintly. That's why I'm good at this. She dove, faster than before, metal screaming. Below, the remaining enemy gunners scrambled to aim. Bullets pinged off the fuselage. One cracked the canopy. Another struck the left wing. Still, she didn't stop. Targeting manual, Ross called. Sarah nodded. Hold steady. Now, she fired again, short, controlled bursts. The cannon spat fire, tearing apart the remaining trucks in a cascade of explosions. The canyon lit up like daylight. But the recoil, too much. The A-10 shuddered violently. Control failure. Ross yelled. We're not pulling up. Sarah yanked the stick, her muscles straining. The horizon tilted wildly. Come on, she whispered through gritted teeth. Don't you die on me yet? For a few eternal seconds, it seemed hopeless. The canyon wall rushed toward them. Ross closed his eyes. And then, the A-10 leveled, skimming the ground by barely 20 feet. Dust and flames trailed behind them. Ross gasped. How did you? She's still got fight, Sarah said, patting the console. So do I. Below, the Marines surged forward through the smoke, firing on the fleeing insurgents. The ambush was broken. The enemy was in full retreat. Dillard raised his radio. Angel 1, This is Hammer 2-6. You did it. We're clear. Repeat, we're clear. Sarah exhaled shakily, leaning back in her seat. Good to hear, Lieutenant. Ross looked at the fuel gauge, near empty. We've got less than 5 minutes of flight time. Then let's use it to get out of this canyon. The A-10 climbed weakly, a single engine groaning. They rose above the smoke, sunlight spilling through scattered clouds. Ross let out a long breath. You realize Command's going to write a whole manual on what you just did. Sarah smiled faintly. Good. Maybe the next pilot won't have to improvise. He chuckled weakly. You think they'll believe it? No, she said softly. But the Marines will. Below, Lieutenant Dillard watched the A-10 disappear into the sky, trailing smoke, battered but unbroken. Around him, his surviving men stood in silence, staring upward. Reyes said quietly, You think she's going to make it back? Dillard's voice was rough. If anyone can, it's her. Then he added, almost to himself, Fire from the sky. That's what she was. God's own fury in a steel angel's wings. Up above, the cockpit was quiet, except for the hum of dying machinery. Sarah leaned her head back, eyes fixed on the open sky ahead. Her brother's voice echoed faintly in her memory, a promise once made between them long ago. If you ever find yourself in the canyon, don't turn back. Keep flying. Always forward. She smiled through tears. Always forward, she whispered. And with that, the A-10 limped west, out of the canyon that had become both her battlefield and her redemption. Smoke trailed from the A-10 like a dying comet. The mountains receded behind them, the storm giving way to a bruised sky painted in reds and grays. Captain Sarah Whitmore sat motionless, her gloved hands locked on the trembling control stick. Every vibration, every groan of the metal beneath her fingertips felt like a heartbeat fading away. Hydraulic pressure's gone, Lieutenant Evan Ross said, scanning the failing instruments. We're losing flight control on the left wing. Engine 2's dead. Fuel. He paused, glancing at her. We're running on fumes. Sarah nodded slightly, eyes forward. Then we glide as far as we can. The cockpit was filled with the stench of burning oil and ozone. Warning lights blinked like a city dying in the dark. They had no music, no sound, but the engine's uneven hum. Yet, to Sarah, there was something almost sacred about the silence between them, the kind of silence that only came after surviving hell. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, cracked and golden beneath the dim sun. The horizon shimmered with heat, and far in the distance, the faint glint of an airstrip shimmered like a mirage. Ross squinted. Is that forward base Talon? Sarah nodded. Home. Barely 30 miles, Ross said, his voice flat. At this rate, we'll be lucky to make 10. Sarah adjusted the throttle carefully, coaxing the engine to life again. It sputtered, coughed, then steadied, weak but breathing. That's all we need, she whispered. The radio crackled suddenly. Angel 1, this is Talon Control. We have visual on your smoke trail. What's your status? Ross leaned toward the mic. Talon, this is Angel 1. We're hit bad. Engine 2's gone. Hydraulics failing. Request emergency landing clearance. Copy that, Angel 1. Runway 19er is clear. Medical teams are on standby. Can you confirm flight stability? Sarah smirked. Define stability. There was a pause. Then, understood. You're cleared in. Ross turned to her, tension carving deep lines across his face. Sarah, if the hydraulics go completely, we'll lose pitch and roll. You won't be able to control descent. I'll use differential thrust and trim. He blinked. That's insane. She looked at him with faint amusement. So was flying into that canyon. But we're still here. Ross shook his head, muttering under his breath. You've got to stop saying things like that. Every time you do, I feel like we're about to die. She smiled, tired, defiant. We're not dying today. Inside forward base Talon, airmen and medics gathered along the runway, watching the horizon. The emergency alarm wailed across the base. Technicians scrambled to lay foam across the landing strip, expecting a fireball. Colonel James Weller, the base commander, stood with binoculars, squinting against the sunlight. You're telling me she went into the canyon? The operations officer nodded. Twice, sir. Took out 3 mortar teams, multiple machine guns, and a convoy. Weller exhaled sharply. And she's still flying? Barely. Then clear that runway, Weller ordered. If anyone's earned a straight shot home, it's her. In the cockpit, sweat dripped down Sarah's temple. The control stick fought her with every movement. The A-10 groaned, metal straining. Approach vectors coming up, Ross said. Crosswinds at 12 knots. You're gonna have to come in shallow. Sarah flexed her fingers. Got it. The desert wind howled outside, rocking the crippled jet. Altitude 1,000, Ross called. Gear up, ears unresponsive. Sarah cursed under her breath. Manual release. He reached down, yanking the emergency lever. The landing gear extended with a mechanical scream, one side jerking slower than the other. Ross glanced out the window. Left gear's half-locked. That's not great. Then we'll land on 3 points and pray. The radio came alive again. Angel 1, Talon control. You're coming in too low. Recommend pulling up. Sarah's voice was steady. Negative, Talon. We're committed. Just keep the strip clear. Roger that. You're green to land. Ross swallowed hard. You're really going for it. Sarah's lips twitched into a faint grin. You think I came this far to eject now? At 800 feet, the A-10's last engine coughed again. The gauges dipped. The RPM needle flickered, then steadied just above 0. Come on, girl, Sarah whispered, stroking the throttle. Just a little farther. Ross murmured, she's running on prayers and fumes. The base was close now. Sarah could see the figures on the ground, the vehicles lined along the runway, the ambulances waiting with lights flashing. The jet began to sink faster. Altitude dropping 700, 650. Ross's voice tightened. We're losing lift. Sarah eased the stick back, coaxing the nose up. The controls resisted like a dying animal. The radio barked again. Angel 1, you're coming in short. Sarah gritted her teeth. Not today. At 400 feet, the right engine sputtered its last. Silence filled the cockpit. The A-10 glided, dead weight now, cutting through air with nothing but momentum. Power's gone, Ross said. Sarah didn't blink. Then we coast. The runway loomed ahead, impossibly close yet miles away. She trimmed the nose down slightly, sacrificing altitude for distance. The desert wind caught the wings, buffeting them. 300 feet. 250. Ross's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah steadied her breath. Hold on. The ground raced up to meet them. Impact. The A-10 slammed onto the runway with a thunderous screech. The left gear buckled instantly, sparks showering the tarmac. The fuselage dragged, tearing up asphalt. The cockpit shook violently. Alarm screamed. Ross braced his arms against the console. We're skidding hard, right? Sarah yanked the emergency brake lever, fighting the spin. The A-10 slid across the foam-covered strip, the right wing scraping a trail of fire. For a second, everything went white. Smoke, fire, chaos. Then silence. The jet came to rest, tilted on one side, cockpit intact but battered. Ground crews rushed in, extinguishers hissing. Medics surrounded the wreck, cutting open panels to reach them. Colonel Weller himself sprinted across the tarmac. "Get that canopy open," he shouted. A crewman pried it loose, and smoke billowed out. Sarah sat slumped in her seat, helmet cracked, breathing ragged. Ross beside her groaned, conscious but dazed. Weller climbed up, pulling off his cap. "Captain Whitmore, you're one hell of a pilot." Sarah looked up weakly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I had good motivation. Those Marines?" Weller asked. She nodded. They made it out. Weller placed a hand on the canopy frame, shaking his head in disbelief. "You saved 23 men, Whitmore. You turned a massacre into a miracle." Sarah closed her eyes. "Then it was worth it." Hours later, the wrecked A-10 sat under floodlights, scorched but whole. Technicians moved around it like surgeons, documenting every bullet hole, every scar. Sarah lay on a stretcher nearby, oxygen mask pressed to her face. Through the haze of painkillers and exhaustion, she could hear snippets of conversation, disbelief, admiration, awe. One mechanic muttered, "She flew that thing with no hydraulics?" Another replied, "And no right engine. Hell, the hog wasn't meant to survive that." Sarah smiled faintly behind her mask. "Guess no one told her that," Ross said from the bed beside her, grinning weakly. She turned her head toward him. "You still think I'm crazy?" He chuckled. "Absolutely. But I'm starting to see the upside." Later that night, Colonel Weller entered the infirmary. He stood at the foot of Sarah's bed, hands clasped behind his back. "Command's calling this Operation Iron Angel," he said. "They're already writing the reports. Your actions saved an entire unit." Sarah's voice was soft. "It wasn't about reports, sir." He nodded. "I know. But it'll mean something to the people who'll never forget your name." She looked at him quietly. "What about the canyon?" Weller frowned. "We're sending a recovery team tomorrow. You don't need to worry about that place anymore." Sarah stared at the ceiling, eyes distant. "That place doesn't let go that easily." Outside, under the vast desert sky, her A-10 rested in silence. Its metal scars glowed faintly under the lights, a monument of survival. To anyone else, it was just a wreck. To Sarah, it was a promise fulfilled. To her brother, to the Marines, to herself. As she drifted into sleep, the echoes of the canyon still whispered in her mind, the sound of thunder, gunfire, and the haunting hum of a jet that refused to die. And somewhere in the darkness, she smiled, because tomorrow she'd fly again. The sun was rising over the Korangal Valley when the search teams began their descent. The mountains, still scarred from days of bombardment, looked like the ribs of some ancient beast that had endured too many wars. Smoke curled lazily from shattered ridges, and the air smelled of metal and blood. The Marines moved carefully, their boots crunching over debris, pieces of twisted steel, burnt ammunition, and fragments of the A-10 they'd watched vanish into the canyon 2 days earlier. Captain Sarah Whitmore's name had already become a whisper among the troops, the angel who fell from heaven to save the doomed. No one said it out loud, but they all carried the same ache, guilt that they were alive because she had gone down. Lieutenant Dillard led the group. His uniform was torn, his face bandaged, his movements slow but deliberate. He had refused evacuation. "Not until we bring her home," he told the medics. His voice had the weight of a promise, and no one dared argue. The radio crackled with updates from the command post. "Team Alpha, any visual on wreckage?" "Negative," Dillard replied, scanning the jagged terrain through binoculars. "We're in the lower valley now. Heavy debris, but no sign of the cockpit." The team moved deeper into the canyon. Each corner felt like walking into a grave. Shattered aluminum glinted in the sun. Parts of her wing, her landing gear, her helmet visor, all scattered across the dirt like the remnants of a broken dream. The river nearby murmured softly, carrying away the ashes of battle. Corporal Vega, a quiet man who'd barely spoken since the attack, stopped suddenly. "Sir," he called, pointing to a blackened section of earth. The soil was scorched in a perfect semicircle, and the nearby rocks bore deep grooves where something large had skidded. Dillard knelt beside it. "Impact zone," he muttered. He brushed away a layer of soot, revealing a small metallic plate. Stamped on it were the words, A-10C Thunderbolt 2, Whitmore, S. The men fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to still, as if nature itself bowed in mourning. "Spread out," Dillard finally said, his voice hoarse. She could have ejected before the hit. They searched in widening circles, calling her name Whitmore. Captain Whitmore. But the canyon swallowed their voices. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning the back of their necks. Dust choked their lungs. Every step deeper into the valley felt like walking through her final moments. Then the radio cracked again. "Team Bravo here. We found part of the tail assembly 2 clicks north of your position." "Copy that," Dillard replied. "Mark it and move east. We'll sweep toward the riverbed." By noon, the heat was suffocating. Sweat soaked their uniforms. They reached the bend of the river, where the current shimmered like molten glass. Dillard crouched at the water's edge, scanning the area. Something pale fluttered among the rocks downstream, a fragment of fabric moving faintly in the wind. "Vega," he said sharply. "Check that out." The corporal ran ahead, then froze mid-step. "Sir," he called, his voice trembling. "It's a parachute." Dillard sprinted over, his heart hammering. There, tangled between the stones and half submerged in water, was a torn white parachute, U-Sishu. The cord stretched into the brush, as if pulled by something or someone. "She made it out," Dillard whispered, eyes wide. She actually made it. Adrenaline surged through the squad. They followed the trail of the cords, stepping carefully through the rocks. The brush thickened ahead, and suddenly, a weak voice broke the silence. "Hey, over here." Every man froze. Dillard's breath caught in his throat. He pushed through the brush, and there she was. Captain Sarah Whitmore lay propped against a boulder, her flight suit shredded, one arm bound with makeshift bandages. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried blood, her hair matted, her lips cracked. But her eyes, those steady, steel-gray eyes, still burned with that same defiant fire. "Damn," she croaked, trying to smile. "You boys took your time." Dillard dropped to his knees beside her, emotion choking his voice. "Jesus, Captain. We thought you were gone." Sarah coughed, the sound dry and painful. "Not yet," she rasped. "That canyon tried, but it doesn't get to win." The men surrounded her, silent, awed. For a moment, even the war seemed to fade. All that existed was this battered woman, the one who had fallen from the sky to save them. Dillard tore open his canteen and pressed it to her lips. "Easy, ma'am. Just sip." She drank greedily, wincing with each swallow. Her hands trembled, but her voice steadied. "Did they make it? My Marines? Are they alive?" "They're all safe," Dillard said softly. "Every last one." "Because of you?" Sarah's eyes glistened. She leaned back, relief washing over her face. Then it was worth it. Her head tilted slightly, exhaustion pulling her under, but Dillard caught her before she fell. "Stay with me, Captain. We're getting you out." Vega keyed the radio. "Command, this is Team Alpha. We found her. She's alive. Repeat, Angel 1 is alive. Request immediate medevac." The voice that came back was stunned. "Say again, Alpha? Confirm alive?" "Confirmed." Vega shouted. "She's banged up but breathing." Cheers erupted over the combs. Somewhere above the clouds, Black Hawks were already spinning up. Dillard looked around the canyon one last time. The mountains stood silent, as if humbled. The very place that had swallowed their hope now gave them a miracle. Within 30 minutes, the rescue choppers thundered overhead. The downdraft whipped the river into white foam as medics rappelled down. Sarah blinked against the spray, her hand instinctively clutching Dillard's. "Don't let them say it was luck," she murmured. "Tell them." "I flew because someone had to." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'll tell them the truth, ma'am, that you never gave up." The medics lifted her onto a stretcher, strapping her in carefully. As they carried her toward the chopper, the Marines stood at attention, a silent, improvised salute amid the rubble of war. As the helicopter lifted off, dust swirling around them, Sarah raised one trembling hand in farewell. Dillard watched her disappear into the sky, the same sky she had once ruled. When the sound of the rotors faded, the canyon was still again. But something had changed. The valley that had been a tomb for so many now felt like sacred ground. That night, as the team returned to base, no one spoke. Yet every man carried the same thought. They had witnessed something greater than courage. They had seen devotion that defied death itself. At Bagram Air Base, medics swarmed her stretcher, rushing her into the medical tent. The commanding officer, Colonel Ramsey, stood outside, head bowed. He had ordered her not to go that day. Now, seeing her alive, he whispered to himself, "You disobeyed, and you saved them all." Hours later, Dillard was allowed inside. Sarah lay pale and weak, tubes in her arm, oxygen mask over her face. But when she saw him, she managed a faint smirk. "Guess I broke your record for near-death experiences." Dillard chuckled softly, pulling a small, soot-stained flag patch from his pocket, the one ripped from her flight suit during the crash. "You dropped this," he said, setting it on her bedside table. Her tired eyes softened. "Then hold on to it for me, until I can earn it back." Outside the tent, the night was quiet, stars scattered across the Afghan sky. Somewhere in the darkness, the canyon slept again, no longer a place of death, but a testament to one woman's refusal to surrender. And though Sarah Whitmore would spend months in recovery, her story had already taken flight. Among the Marines, they began calling her the angel who fell, but never left. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the recovery wing of Bagram Air Base Hospital. Monitors beeped softly, marking the slow rhythm of survival. Captain Sarah Whitmore lay motionless beneath a thin sheet, her body wrapped in bandages, her right arm immobilized in a sling. The doctors said she'd broken ribs, fractured her leg, and suffered severe burns. But when they mentioned her survival, they always shook their heads, because no one could explain it. 2 weeks had passed since the crash. 2 weeks since she fell into the canyon that had claimed hundreds before her. The Marines she saved had visited every day, even when she was unconscious, leaving tokens on her bedside, a dog tag, a bullet casing, a patch from Dillard's uniform that read "No man left behind." Now, sunlight filtered through the thin hospital curtains. Sarah's eyelids fluttered. The first thing she saw was the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her. The second thing she heard was the faint hum of a familiar voice. Dillard's. "Morning, Captain," he said quietly from a chair beside her. He looked exhausted, his beard thicker, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. But when he saw her move, he smiled like a man seeing dawn after endless night. "You've been out a while." Sarah's voice was hoarse. "How long?" 2 weeks, he said. "Doctors said you might not wake up, but I told them they didn't know you." A dry laugh escaped her lips, weak but real. "Guess death's still afraid of me." He grinned. "Seems like it." When the nurses arrived to check her vitals, Dillard stepped out. But outside the room, soldiers had gathered. Marines, pilots, medics, all waiting for word. When he emerged and gave a thumbs up, the hallway erupted in cheers. Some clapped. Others bowed their heads in silent relief. That evening, Colonel Ramsey entered her room. His stern expression cracked into something softer as he stood beside her bed. "You disobeyed a direct order, Captain." Sarah's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You're welcome, sir." He chuckled despite himself. "I should court-martial you." "You should," she agreed. "But then who'd buy the first round?" He laughed quietly, then his tone shifted. "Those men you saved, they wrote letters. Every one of them. The command has copies. You're being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross." Her eyes widened slightly. "That's unnecessary, sir." He shook his head. "No, Captain. It's earned." When he left, she stared at the ceiling again, her thoughts drifting. She didn't fly for medals. She never had. She flew because the people on the ground, the ones fighting, bleeding, surviving, needed someone to have their back. That night, when the lights dimmed, the hospital was quiet except for the hum of machines. Then, faintly, she heard singing from down the hall. A group of Marines, her Marines, were outside, softly humming an old war hymn. It was rough, out of tune, but it was beautiful. Sarah turned her head toward the window and whispered to herself, "Still here, boys. Still watching over you." A month later, she was cleared for light physical therapy. The first time she stood, her legs trembled under her weight. The crash had nearly crushed her left knee. The pain was searing. But she refused to quit. Every step was a battle, and she treated it like a mission. "Slow down, Captain," her therapist warned. "You're not racing the Taliban." Sarah grinned through clenched teeth. "You've never met my competition." Her determination spread through the ward. Other wounded soldiers began pushing themselves harder, inspired by her grit. She became a symbol, the angel who fought her way back. By her third week of therapy, visitors became constant. Pilots from nearby squadrons dropped by to meet her. Marines brought photos, stories, and letters. One by one, they all said the same thing. "You gave us hope." Dillard came every day. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes silence. They didn't need many words. Shared glances carried entire conversations. One afternoon, he handed her something small wrapped in cloth. "Thought you might want this back." She unwrapped it carefully. It was her flight badge, the one scorched and torn from her A-10. Her eyes softened. "I thought that was gone." "I kept it safe," he said. "Figured you'd want it when you were ready." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'm ready." She pinned it to the strap of her sling. "Still my wings." When she was finally discharged, the base held an informal ceremony. No press, no politicians, just soldiers. They gathered in the open hangar, the late afternoon sun painting the floor gold. Colonel Ramsey stood before them, a folder in his hand. "There are rules in war," he began, "and there are hearts that break them for the right reason." He turned to Sarah. "Captain Whitmore, you defied orders. You risked your life to save your fellow soldiers, and you reminded us all what courage truly looks like." Applause thundered through the hangar. Some men cheered. Others simply stood silently, their faces solemn. Dillard stepped forward and saluted her, sharp, unwavering. She returned the gesture, her right arm shaking slightly from the effort. He leaned in and whispered, "You'll always be our angel, Mom." She smiled. "Then don't make me come back down to save you again." Laughter rippled through the crowd. That night, when the base quieted, Sarah sat outside near the runway, watching jets take off into the dark sky. The roar of engines was music to her, a heartbeat she could never forget. Dillard joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Not used to silence," she replied softly. "When you've flown through fire, quiet feels too." "Empty," he nodded, sipping his coffee. "You think you'll ever fly again?" She looked at the horizon, the stars reflected in her tired eyes. "Flying isn't something you do," she said. "It's something you are. So yeah, one way or another, I'll fly." They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, listening to the distant hum of engines. Somewhere far beyond those mountains, the canyon still lay in shadows. But now, it carried a different meaning, not as a graveyard of hope, but as a testament to what one soul could do when everyone else had given up. Weeks later, news reached her that the Marines had unofficially renamed their outpost in the Coincidental Valley Whitmore Ridge. They'd carved her name into a slab of rock near the edge of the canyon, where she had dived into chaos to save them. The photo they sent showed the inscription clearly, "In honor of Captain Sarah Whitmore, the angel who never left her Marines behind." When Sarah saw it, tears finally escaped her control. She pressed the photo to her chest, whispering, "You boys didn't have to do that." But deep down, she was proud, not of the fame, not of the story, but of the fact that in the darkest moment, she had stood where others would have turned away. That night, she returned to her quarters and pinned the burned patch, her old flight emblem, on the wall above her bunk. Below it, she placed a photo of her squadron, and beneath that, the word she had always lived by, until the end. As she lay down, exhaustion pulling her into sleep, she dreamed of flight, not of battle or flames, but of soaring through clear blue skies. The engines purred softly beneath her, the world stretching wide and peaceful below. And for the first time in a long time, Captain Sarah Whitmore smiled in her sleep. Because angels, after all, never really fall. They just land where they're needed most. The world outside Bagram had not stopped turning. Reports of conflict, quiet victories, and casualties continued to flow in from every corner of the war zone. Yet somewhere in the midst of that chaos, one story began to echo louder than the rest, the story of Captain Sarah Whitmore. News outlets, briefings, and military circles whispered her name, Angel One, not because she sought recognition, she never did, but because the courage she had shown, the lives she had saved, and the defiance she had displayed against impossible odds could not be ignored. Back at the airbase, life returned to a semblance of normal. Jets roared down runways, Marines trained in the shadow of rugged mountains, and medics huddled over their logs. But there was always a space reserved for her, a symbol of hope etched into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed or heard of her deeds. Sarah had returned to flying, cautiously, carefully, but each flight carried a purpose beyond herself. She trained younger pilots, teaching them not just tactics and maneuvers, but the intangible art of survival, courage, and the weight of responsibility. She told them stories, carefully leaving out the parts that would make them fear the canyon, focusing instead on the lessons she had learned amid her. "Flying is not about the machine," she would say, voice steady, eyes reflecting the endless sky. "It's about knowing when to trust yourself, and when to trust the people on the ground who count on you." Her trainees listened, rapt. To them, she was no longer just a decorated pilot. She was legend. They called her Angel One in hushed tones, as though saying her name aloud gave them the courage to face their own missions. Meanwhile, back in the Coincidental Valley, the Marines she had saved continued to honor her memory in their own ways. Lieutenant Dillard, now promoted to captain, led missions through the same perilous passes, sharing her story with every new recruit. It wasn't luck, he told them. It was will. It was courage. And it was someone who refused to give up on us. Corporal Vega, who had once stumbled through the canyon like a frightened boy. now carried herself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen angels fall from the sky and live. He placed a small, weathered photo of Sarah in his personal gear, a reminder that no matter how dark the battle, someone was always watching your back. The outpost itself, Whitmore Ridge, had grown into more than just a memorial. It became a symbol, a place where Marines would stop to say a quiet prayer, leave a token, or simply stand in silence and remember. Over time, every new squad that passed through the valley would learn the story. How one pilot defied death itself to save a platoon from annihilation. Years later, Sarah would be invited to speak at military academies and conferences. She never sought attention, yet when she stepped onto a stage, the room fell silent. Cadets, officers, and even seasoned veterans listened as she recounted not only the tactics and maneuvers of her mission, but the emotional truth behind it: fear, determination, and the moral weight of command. Courage is not the absence of fear, she would tell them. Courage is taking action in spite of it. It's knowing that someone's life might be in your hands, and deciding you will not fail them, even if everything tells you it's impossible. Her words became doctrine in spirit, if not in regulation. Training manuals included briefings about A-10 operations in extreme conditions, and unofficially, every pilot who trained under her or learned her story carried the phrase Angel One in their minds during their most dangerous flights. The canyon itself became a pilgrimage site for those who wanted to honor bravery and sacrifice. Engineers and Marines surveyed the cliffs, placing markers where they could safely memorialize the battle. Veterans carved plaques into stone and planted small American flags along the rim. Each marker bore her name, a testament not to glory or medals, but to the lives she had fought to protect. Years later, a young Marine standing at the edge of the canyon whispered to himself, "If she could fly into that fire, then I can face what's ahead." And somewhere in the distant sky, as if carried on the wind, the legend of Angel One lived on. Sarah herself remained humble about the recognition. She rarely visited the canyon, preferring to remember it as it was, raw, violent, and alive. But when she did, she walked quietly along the rocks, touching a plaque, brushing the flag, and remembering the men whose lives she had saved. Each visit was a quiet affirmation. Bravery wasn't about medals, fame, or even survival. It was about choosing to act when all odds seemed insurmountable. During one visit, Dillard joined her. Together, they looked down at the canyon floor, imagining the chaos, the fire, and the moments when death had seemed inevitable. She would have hated the fanfare, he said softly, knowing she could hear him even without a response. "I'd like to think she'd be proud," Sarah whispered. "Not of me, but of them." They stood in silence, letting the wind carry the memory of battle. Below, the canyon remained as deadly as ever, yet somehow quieter, as if acknowledging the courage that had carved its story. Decades later, when Sarah retired from active duty, her story was already legend. Military historians wrote about her missions. Documentaries and articles highlighted her defiance, strategy, and heroism. But more importantly, the people who had been saved, the Marines who owed their lives to her, continued to tell the story in mess halls, briefing rooms, and barracks. She attended reunions, sometimes quietly slipping into the crowd, watching the younger generation of soldiers and pilots discover her legacy anew. And every time she did, the same realization struck her. Courage wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had fought, stumbled, and survived alongside her. When she looked at the sky, she no longer saw only the canyon or the battles she had fought. She saw the countless pilots, soldiers, and Marines who carried a piece of her courage forward, flying, fighting, surviving. And she knew, without doubt, that as long as they remembered her story, she would never truly fall. In classrooms, lecture halls, and hangars, Cadets learned the doctrine of bravery and improvisation under impossible circumstances. They studied her decision-making, her calm in the chaos, and the humanity that guided every maneuver. And in quiet moments, each new generation would whisper her name, Angel One. It was more than a call sign now. It was a symbol of defiance, survival, hope, and the unbreakable bond between those in the air and those on the ground. Captain Sarah Whitmore had done more than survive the canyon. She had created a legacy, a living testament that one person's courage could ripple through generations, changing lives, inspiring hearts, and giving hope to those who would face impossible odds. Somewhere far away, in the endless sky above deserts, mountains, and valleys, her A-10 had once roared. That roar, though silent now, continued to echo in every heart that knew the story. A reminder that when all others gave up, there was always one who would not, the Angel One. And so, the canyon remained, the mountains stood, and the legend endured, untarnished by time, unbroken by fear, and eternal in the spirit of every soldier, pilot, and Marine who learned to fly because one woman had dared to plunge into the canyon of death.